Las Vegas had a way of making danger look elegant. It hid panic beneath gold light, buried desperation under velvet carpets, and wrapped moral collapse in the polished glamour of penthouse views and private elevators. That was what made this latest turn so explosive. By the time Chelsea arrived at Adam's hotel, the crisis was already alive, already spreading, already feeding on secrets that had been growing in the dark. But Chelsea's arrival changed the temperature of everything. What had been a carefully managed operation, cold and strategic on the surface, instantly became personal, volatile, and impossible to contain. Because Chelsea did not come to Vegas as a passive observer. She came as a woman driven by instinct, by fear, by loyalty, and by a deep fury that had been building ever since Adam chose once again to carry a burden alone and pretend he was protecting everyone by shutting them out. The moment she stepped into his world, all the neat compartments he had built began to crack. Adam had convinced himself that distance was discipline. He had told himself that if he kept Chelsea away from Matt's orbit, if he stayed focused on the mission, if he let her remain in Genoa City while he handled the ugliness himself, then he could control the fallout. It was the kind of reasoning that had once made him dangerous in business and effective in a crisis, but it also revealed the flaw that always returned whenever his emotions were involved. Adam still believed that love gave him the right to make decisions for other people. He still believed that carrying pain alone was a noble act, when in truth, it was often just another form of arrogance. Chelsea's arrival forced that truth into the open with brutal speed. She did not need long to understand that the situation was worse than she had been led to believe. The atmosphere around Adam was wrong from the moment she saw him. He was too guarded, too controlled, too calm in the way men become calm when they are one mistake away from catastrophe, and Riza's presence only sharpened that feeling. Riza was not merely an inconvenience or an awkward reminder of the role Adam had been playing. She was living evidence of the compromises he had made. Chelsea could read the energy between them instantly, not because it was romantic in any real sense, but because it carried the residue of manipulation, proximity, and emotional deception. Even knowing that Adam's closeness with Riza had been part of a strategy did not make it easier to stomach. Chelsea understood the logic, but logic did nothing to soften humiliation. There was something intolerable about seeing another woman standing in a space that had become too intimate, too charged, too loaded with half-truths. Chelsea's anger was not rooted only in jealousy. It was rooted in the realization that Adam had once again crossed into a morally gray arena where he expected everyone else to trust his intentions while ignoring the damage caused by his methods. He had not betrayed Chelsea in the conventional sense, but he had betrayed the fragile peace they had built by putting himself in a position where appearances, emotional entanglements, and dangerous choices could no longer be separated. For Riza, Chelsea's arrival was a shock that threatened to unravel the last illusion she had been holding on to. She already knew Adam had been performing a role to get close to her and extract information connected to Matt. She had already been forced to confront the humiliation of being used in a game she had not fully understood until it was too late. But knowledge did not erase feeling. There had still been moments where Adam's attention felt real, where his intensity seemed too convincing to be entirely fabricated, where his gaze suggested something deeper than strategy. Chelsea's sudden presence destroyed whatever space Riza had used to keep those fantasies alive. It turned private embarrassment into public defeat, and beneath the sting of that realization was something far more dangerous than heartbreak: resentment. Riza had been manipulated by Adam, but she had also been manipulated by Matt, trapped between two forces, using her for different reasons. Chelsea's arrival made her feel cornered, and cornered people became unpredictable. Shame curdled into anger, and anger created the exact kind of instability that could blow Adam's plan apart. Chelsea, however, was not interested in pretending civility for the sake of anyone's comfort. She was furious with Adam for keeping her in the dark, furious with the risk he had embraced, furious with the possibility that while he was playing psychological chess in Vegas, Nick had been slipping further into danger. That last piece cut deepest. Once the full weight of Nick's disappearance settled over her, Chelsea's emotions shifted from wounded pride to raw urgency. This was no longer just about Adam's secrecy or Riza's role in the scheme. Nick was out there somewhere, and every minute wasted on damage control or half explanations could cost him dearly. Chelsea's decision to stay was immediate and immovable. Adam could protest, warn, argue, and insist that Vegas was too dangerous, but the more he tried to push her away, the stronger Chelsea's resolve became. She had spent too much of her life watching powerful men justify impossible decisions in the name of protection. She was done standing back while other people defined the terms of the fight. Adam recognized almost at once that Chelsea's refusal to leave would alter every variable. His operation had depended on isolation, compartmentalization, and the ability to adapt quickly without emotional distraction. Chelsea destroyed that framework by bringing truth into spaces built on performance. Around her, Adam could not fully inhabit the manipulative persona he needed. He could not lie as smoothly, could not bluff as coldly, could not pretend that every sacrifice was acceptable. She reminded him of the life he claimed to be trying to preserve, and that made every compromise feel dirtier. Yet his anger toward Chelsea was never pure anger. It was tangled with fear, and under that fear was guilt. He knew she had every right to be there. He knew he had been wrong to exclude her. He knew, too, that part of his resistance came from the terror of failing in front of her. Adam could endure being seen as ruthless, even reckless, but being seen as powerless was another matter. Chelsea's presence meant there would now be a witness to his limits, to the cracks in his confidence, to the possibility that he might not be able to save Nick at all. And while that emotional storm intensified inside the hotel, Nick was enduring a far more brutal collapse elsewhere. Matt's vengeance was not impulsive. That was what made it so sinister. He was not satisfied with simple violence or immediate revenge. He wanted erosion. He wanted to hollow Nick out slowly, to reduce him piece by piece until whatever strength Nick had once represented was turned into ruin. Matt's obsession with punishment had become deeply personal, shaped by grievance, humiliation, and the twisted conviction that Nick's destruction would restore some lost balance in his own mind. Feeding Nick's addiction was not merely a tactic. It was a philosophy of revenge. Matt wanted to make Nick complicit in his own downfall. Wanted the people who loved Nick to watch him disintegrate in ways that felt sickeningly familiar and impossible to stop. There was cruelty in the plan, but there was also vanity. Matt wanted to prove that virtue was fragile, that a man like Nick could be broken if pushed through the right wounds with enough pressure and time. Nick's suffering was made worse by the fact that he remained partially aware of what was happening to him. He was not completely gone. Somewhere beneath the chemical haze, beneath the disorientation and the physical weakness, Nick understood that he was being dragged toward an abyss deliberately designed for him. That awareness turned his ordeal into something even darker. He could feel himself losing control, while still understanding that control was exactly what Matt wanted to strip away. And that knowledge generated its own kind of torment, shame, before the fall had even finished happening. Nick had spent years defining himself through resilience, responsibility, and the ability to endure family chaos without surrendering to it. Now he was trapped in a nightmare where his own body and mind could be weaponized against him. The more he fought, the more exhausted he became. The more he resisted, the more Matt seemed to enjoy the struggle. It was not enough for Matt to hurt him. He needed Nick to know he was being dismantled. Back at the hotel, Chelsea began piecing together the emotional map of the crisis with a sharpness Adam had underestimated. She could see that Riza was unstable, that Adam was overextended, that every delay increased the odds of disaster. Rather than shrink from the ugliness, Chelsea leaned into it. Her protective instinct hardened into strategy. If Adam had been trying to play this like a closed operation, Chelsea would force it into the open and strip away the illusions people were hiding behind. She confronted not only the danger outside them, but the dishonesty inside the room. Her anger became useful because it was honest. It pierced the evasions Adam preferred and exposed the wounded pride Riza could no longer conceal. That intensity did not make Chelsea reckless. It made her decisive. And that decisiveness unsettled both of them. Riza found herself reacting to Chelsea in ways that surprised even her. What began as defensiveness quickly evolved into something more poisonous. Chelsea represented everything Riza could not compete with: history, legitimacy, emotional permanence. Adam's choices around Chelsea revealed where his heart truly lived, no matter how skillfully he had performed otherwise. For a woman already humiliated by manipulation, that truth was unbearable. And humiliation has always been one of the most combustible emotional states in any human being. It invites revenge, self-destruction, or betrayal, sometimes all three at once. Riza began to realize that information was the only real power she had left. She knew things about Matt's movements, his patterns, his paranoia, his hidden arrangements, but giving that information up would mean accepting that she had been reduced to a pawn. Holding on to it, however, meant protecting the very man who had also used her. The conflict inside her became vicious. She wanted to hurt Adam for what he had done. She wanted Chelsea to feel threatened. She wanted Matt to lose. Most of all, she wanted someone else to suffer enough to match her own humiliation. That is the kind of mental state in which catastrophic decisions are born. Adam saw it happening and understood too late that the greatest danger in the room was no longer external. It was emotional volatility. The mission had moved beyond surveillance and deception into raw human reaction. This was where he was weakest, because no amount of planning could fully control people whose pride had been shattered. Chelsea's presence had accelerated the truth, but it had also removed the careful layers Adam had been using to delay implosion. Now everything had to be confronted at once. Nick's disappearance, Matt's vengeance, Riza's divided loyalties, Adam's own compromises, Chelsea's justified rage. The pressure became unbearable because every path forward demanded sacrifice. If Adam kept Chelsea close, he risked exposing her to retaliation. If he pushed her away again, he risked losing her trust in a way that might not be repairable. If he leaned on Riza for help, he deepened the emotional wreckage already surrounding her. If he cut her out entirely, he might lose the lead that could save Nick. No option remained clean. Chelsea, meanwhile, was undergoing her own internal shift. Her initial anger had been deeply personal, but as she grasped the full shape of Matt's cruelty, her perspective widened. She was no longer fighting merely as Adam's partner, or as a woman offended by another woman's proximity. She was fighting against a pattern she recognized all too well. Men like Matt thriving on chaos because too many people underestimated the emotional damage they could engineer. Chelsea understood that Matt was not simply targeting Nick's body or freedom. He was targeting identity, family trust, and the emotional architecture that held the Newmans together. That infuriated her in a way that sharpened rather than clouded her thinking. She began to suspect that Matt's revenge extended beyond Nick himself. If Nick collapsed publicly, if Adam's operation failed, if Chelsea became compromised, then the damage would ripple outward and infect every relationship connected to them. Matt was not just hurting people. He was trying to rewrite the balance of power through trauma. That realization changed how Chelsea approached Adam. Her anger did not disappear, but it evolved from accusation into challenge. She refused to let him sink into the familiar role of isolated martyr. If he wanted to save Nick, then he would have to stop controlling the emotional narrative and start trusting the people willing to stand beside him. This became one of the most painful lessons of the entire ordeal. Adam had always been most dangerous, when he believed love required secrecy. Chelsea forced him to face a different possibility, that secrecy was not sacrifice, but fear wearing the mask of strength. Letting her help meant admitting vulnerability. Letting her stay meant acknowledging that he might need saving too. For a man like Adam, that kind of surrender felt nearly unbearable. Yet the crisis stripped him down until resistance became impossible. At last he began to understand that Chelsea's presence was not the threat. His inability to truly share the burden was. As the night deepened and the search for Nick became more urgent, the emotional lines among the three adults in that hotel room kept shifting. Riza hovered on the edge of betrayal, Chelsea burned with focused outrage, and Adam struggled to keep the entire fragile structure from collapsing before they could act. Then came the cruelest twist of all, the growing possibility that Matt was anticipating them. The more Adam replayed recent events, the more he saw signs that Matt had allowed certain pieces of information to circulate, had deliberately baited reactions, had perhaps even expected Chelsea's arrival as a way to destabilize Adam further. That possibility transformed the situation from dangerous to terrifying. Because if Matt was not merely reacting, but directing the emotional currents from a distance, then every choice they had made might already be folded into his revenge. Chelsea refused to let that possibility paralyze her. Instead, it pushed her toward a colder clarity. If Matt wanted emotional chaos, then they would have to weaponize his arrogance against him. If he believed Nick was already lost, if he assumed Adam was distracted, if he counted on Riza remaining too wounded to act decisively, then those assumptions could become openings. Chelsea began to see that the only way forward might involve forcing each person to confront the ugliest truth about themselves. Adam would have to admit he could not outmaneuver Matt alone. Riza would have to decide whether her pride mattered more than a man's life. Chelsea herself would have to accept that helping Adam might require stepping into a darker moral territory than she had intended. That was the heart of the conflict now. Not simply rescue, not merely revenge, but the cost of becoming ruthless enough to survive someone else's ruthlessness. In that sense, Las Vegas became more than a location. It became an emotional battlefield where every character was asked to choose what kind of person they were when fear, humiliation, and love collided. Chelsea was no longer the woman who arrived to steady Adam from the sidelines. She became a force that challenged every false comfort in the room. Adam was no longer the composed strategist who could play everyone without breaking himself. He became a man torn between love and control, facing the consequences of believing he alone could carry darkness. Riza was no longer a supporting player in somebody else's scheme. She became the wounded hinge on which the fate of the night might turn. And Nick, unseen but central, became the embodiment of what Matt was really trying to destroy: endurance, dignity, and the possibility that damaged people could still be saved before it was too late. By the time the next move was set into motion, none of them were untouched. Chelsea's anger had deepened into something fiercer and more dangerous than hurt. Adam's guilt had cracked open his self-certainty. Riza's humiliation had pushed her to the edge of either redemption or revenge. And hanging over all of it was the image of Nick, somewhere in the dark, being dragged toward ruin by a man who had turned vengeance into an art form. That is why this chapter of the story feels so explosive. Not because of one surprise arrival or one villainous act, but because every person involved is being forced into a corner where instinct takes over and morality begins to bend. Love is becoming territorial. Protection is becoming manipulation. Loyalty is becoming a test no one can pass cleanly. And the deeper they go, the more obvious it becomes that nobody will walk out of Vegas unchanged.